Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. These are the words of Frederick Douglass. With them, I welcome you to this edition of Economic SearchLight. Let me draw your attention to this. A very serious issue for grain farmers in the developing world is the contamination of crops with harmful aspergillus species, which produce aflatoxins. Aflatoxin is a silent killer that causes liver cancer and suppresses the immune system. It also retards growth and development in children. People exposed to very high aflatoxin concentrations experience liver failure and rapid death. But there is a novel way to control contamination using a biological control approach. This we'll be looking at on this edition of Economic SearchLight. Dr. Ranajit Bandyopadhyay, a senior plant pathologist at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, IITA, will be explaining the dangers and way out. I am Edmondo Bilo. Let's hit the ground running. In a dusty political climate, it becomes important to note that playing politics with the economy is an expensive business. Let's look at this. In 2010, about 100,000 persons accounted for 80% of Africa's GDP. Not much has changed since then. To critical analysts, the reason this persists is linked to global capitalism, a system that provides impressive opportunities for wealth generation, while ensuring that the wealth generated remains in the hands of a small minority. The advanced nations of the world have been able to manage these aspects of capitalism by promoting social welfare programs and regulating businesses in such a way as to ensure the fair distribution of wealth. This is not the case in the developing countries of Africa, where those close to power siphon state resources, leaving the majority to wallow in poverty. This has continued to fuel violence on the continent, as hungry and jobless youths are easily lured into violence. According to Johan Gartung, social injustice and inequality, both in power and in wealth, lie at the core of structural violence when they result from social structures that disproportionately benefit one group of people while preventing others from meeting their fundamental needs. More than 10 million people globally die each year from hunger and preventable and treatable diseases, with sub-Saharan Africa the region most affected. According to the United Nations Development Programme, an additional $6 billion would ensure that all children in places like Rwanda, Mali, Djibouti, for example, receive basic education. This amount is not up to the $8 billion spent by Americans on cosmetics annually. Did you know that Europeans spend about $11 billion annually on ice cream? This is $2 billion more than the amount required to provide safe drinking water and adequate sanitation in a place like Africa. Gary Lish, in his book, Capitalism as Structural Genocide, states that Americans and Europeans spend $17 billion annually to feed their pets like dogs and cats. Did you know that this amount could easily provide basic health care for everyone in places like Africa? The essence of these figures is to show the gap in the standard of living of those in advanced countries and those living in the poor countries of the world. Leadership in Africa must step up its game to create a better life for the people of the continent. Why we'll wait on African leaders to heed to this advice? So at this point, it is important to look at what Oxfam, an international organization, thinks about international trade. It says if the rules are fair, international trade and investment can be a source of shared prosperity and development. If not, they can be a source of increasing poverty and exclusion. It is clear that international trade today is not fair, and that is one of the sources of poverty in places like Africa. Not too long ago, Oxfam did a report entitled Rigged Rules and Double Standards. The report clearly states that the rules of international trade are rigged in favor of the advanced countries of the West. Oxfam, using the measure called Double Standard Index, attempted to quantify countries that are the most offenders and damaging the interest of Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific countries in international trade. What the organization did was to devise an index to measure an institution like the European Union's protectionism based on its average tariffs. By so doing, Oxfam also looked at the size of European Union's tariffs in agriculture and textiles and its restriction on imports from the poorest ACP countries. In this measure, the European Union and the United States came out as the worst offenders. Another reason why the partnership cannot be equal yet is the corruption and ineptitude of African leadership, a leadership not interested in the common good of the peoples of the continent. These ones steal billions of dollars and stash them abroad. They are more interested in their selfish aims, thus creating loopholes for the West to exploit, and that is what you see in international trade. The program is Economic Searchlight on Splash 105.5 FM. Remember, rural poor in Africa are chronically exposed to unsafe levels of aflatoxins. Food consumed is usually produced, stored, prepared, and marketed by farm families without much awareness of the risk of aflatoxin. It is clear that unless aflatoxin levels in crops and livestock are effectively managed, agricultural development efforts to achieve greater food security and improve health will be undermined, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where contamination is widespread and often acute. We'll be looking at this after the break, so don't go away. The program is Economic Searchlight on Splash 105.5 FM, the Integrity Station. I am Edmund Obilo. My guest on this part of the program is a senior plant pathologist at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, Dr. Ranajit Bandyopadhyay. It's good to have you on Economic Searchlight.
It's great to be on the show.
Dr. Ranajit, there is the life-threatening aflatoxin, and there is AflaSafe to combat it. Tell me more.
AflaSafe actually is making food safe for people in Africa. And it's making food safe with respect to a toxic compound that is found in the food of many of the African crops, primarily maize and groundnut. Maize and groundnut is infected by a fungus by the name of Aspergillus flavus. And this fungus, it goes into the grain and produces a poison called aflatoxin. And according to the International Agency on Research on Cancer, aflatoxin is one of the most potent cancer-causing chemical known to mankind. And this occurs naturally in the food in many parts of the world, but primarily in many countries in Africa.
Is it a recent phenomenon?
It is not a recent phenomenon. The reason why aflatoxin actually came into the picture is way back in early 60s, when several 100,000 turkeys died in England, and they were trying to find out what actually killed those turkeys. And ultimately, it was pointed out that it had something in the feed of the turkey. And they tried to trace where the feed came from. And it seems it came from Brazil. And then they tried to find out what was in the feed. And they found this fungus. And then later on, as they did more studies, they found out that this fungus produces this nasty chemical called aflatoxin, which is one of the most potent poison known to mankind. And that's how it was initially related. But later on, with research, it was found out that aflatoxin causes liver cancer, number one. It suppresses the immune system. It stunts the growth and development of children. And it causes a protein malnutrition disease.
But how come the knowledge of this aflatoxin is not intense in this part of the world?
One of the reasons is that people don't know what it is, number one. You can't see it. Okay?
It's colorless?
It's a chemical. It's a colorless chemical that you see in the grain. And sometimes the grain would look very healthy to you and to people. But in spite of that, there may be toxin inside it.
I was listening to Professor Peter Coty talking about this in a video, and he scared me when he said that aflatoxin is a silent killer and it kills by installment. Does that not call for a sense of urgency in tackling the phenomenon?
Right. So most often people actually see about or hear about aflatoxin when people die, because this toxin actually kills people. In Kenya, about 200 people died in 2004 because of aflatoxin poisoning. That's when people actually start to get scared. But the most important effect of aflatoxin is not that acute death effect. It's the effect that people actually get through continuous exposure of the chronic exposure of aflatoxin. And it gradually begins to actually accumulate in your body.
So AflaSafe is a biological control of aflatoxin.
Right. So AflaSafe is a very, very potent biological control product that can reduce toxin contamination in the field by in between 80 and 99%. If you look at how the toxin contamination actually takes place naturally, this fungus that I talked about that produces the toxin, it's there in the field, okay? And then in the field, it infects the crop, and it goes inside the grain right in the crop, in the field itself. And after the farmers harvest the crop and bring it to their homestead, at that time, and if the conditions of storage are not good, the toxin contamination begins to increase. So with AflaSafe, what we do is, the fungus that produce the toxin in the field, what we call as the toxin-producing strains of the fungus, those toxin-producing strains, we replace them by a non-toxin-producing strain. So what we do is, we go into in a country, for example, and we sample about 500 to 600 different crop samples and get about 6,000 strains of this fungus. And then within this fungus, there's a large amount of variability. There are some strains produce a large amount of toxin, and there are other strains that do not produce toxin. So we, through research, identify these non-toxin producing strains from the country itself. It is not brought from other countries. So we identify these non-toxin producing strains which are native in nature, and these have genetic defects in actually producing toxins. They are highly competitive. They belong to a genetic group that is entirely non-toxin producers. They are highly competitive in the field in terms of outcompeting the toxin producing strains. So out of that 6,000 through research, we get to 4 strains. And those 4 strains are now formulated into a product that we call as Aflasafe.
So how does it work?
Okay. So what we do is, when we have these 4 strains, we put those 4 strains on a carrier. And in our case, the carrier is sorghum grain. And the reason why we have chosen sorghum grain is because it's a good food source for the fungus. Okay? So what we do is, we take these strains, in a very pure condition, we get the sorghum grains from the farmers, we kill the grain because we don't want the sorghum grain when applied in the field to become a weed. So we kill the grain, we kill all the contaminants inside the grain, and then we take these 4 strains and we have a process here through which we coat the spores of the fungus on the grain itself. And then those are then packaged. And while actually making the product, we also ensure that we change the color of the sorghum from the normal white into a blue so that it doesn't look like a food sorghum anymore. And so that's packaged. And all that the farmers have to do is to take this product, 10 kilo of each of this product, go into their farm about 2 to 3 weeks before flowering of the crop, and in this case both maize and groundnut, and then they just throw it on the ground, just like they're broadcasting fertilizer. You throw your sorghum on the soil, and the soil is wet, and so this fungus which is now coated on the sorghum, that begins to grow and colonize and eats up the sorghum and becomes its food source. And then it begins to multiply and then spread around and occupies all the areas that normally Aspergillus would occupy. And so it displaces out the toxin-producing strains by making a population of these good strains in the field before anything else can come in.
Is the IITA producing this in commercial quantity yet?
So one of the things that has happened is we have done this thing, we have done a lot of trials with the farmers. The farmers were really excited because they could see that the toxin contamination in their maize and groundnut was down by in between 80 and 99%. And so they started demanding for the product. But at that time, we were making the product in our lab, and we couldn't make enough. I mean, at that time, we could make about 12 tons of the product with 25 people in 4 months. Okay? And that was not enough. And so the farmers started actually saying, okay, you have got this product, but we don't have access to it, so what good it is. And we realized that we can only make impact only if we can actually produce this in commercial quantities and make it available to the farmer so that the farmers can actually buy it.
Is that what you're doing now?
That's exactly what we are doing. So we have actually now got a manufacturing plant here in IIT in Ibadan, where we can have the capacity to produce Aflasafe 3.5 tons every hour. And 3.5 tons every hour means that every hour what we produce can treat 350 hectares.
But that is not enough for a country like Nigeria.
So if you actually take it per hour, and if you convert that into per day and then per month and per year, the amount that we can produce in 3 shifts can treat 1.5 million hectares. But that's not enough, you're right. So there is a need for actually having more plants like this. And IITA is not a commercial entity. And IITA is doing this just to demonstrate that this product makes commercial sense. It makes commercial sense to a manufacturer who produces it because there's a market for it. It makes commercial sense to the farmer who uses it because he makes profit by selling this good quality grain in the market. But most of all, it makes sense to people who actually use these Aflasafe treated grain because now they can use those grains in the food and feed sector where aflatoxin actually causes havoc, particularly in the feed sector.
So are you already discussing with the private sector to see how this can be expanded?
So in Nigeria, There have been private sectors that have come in, but we have not been. We were not ready with how to actually license this out. So we are gradually understanding how to do it, and so we expect that in the next couple of years we will have a system in place through which we can license this product to a commercial manufacturer.
Can I set up a modular plant?
You can if you want, and we can actually help you do that. We have, in fact, we are setting up a modular manufacturing plant in Kenya on behalf of the Kenyan government. Here, what is going to happen is that people can set up a modular manufacturing plant. The purpose of having this plant, this is a prototype plant, that people come and see how to do it. We have the designs already laid out. We have the standard operating protocols. We basically know how to do this. We can teach people how to do it.
Tell me, where did you get the support to build the plant you have within the premises of the IITA?
When we had this demand from the growers, we needed a manufacturing plant. And so we approached the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and asked them if they can help us in the commercialization process. And so that's where they came ahead and gave a grant through an organization called Partnership for Aflatoxin Control in Africa, or PACA, which is based in the African Union. So the Gates Foundation gave a grant to the African Union to help us to actually build this plant here in IITA in Ibadan. And the genesis of the technology, the first grant that we got to actually develop the product in 2003 came from Germany. And subsequently, the governments of Austria and the governments of the United States, they have helped us immensely in order for transmitting or for enhancing the program in other parts of Africa.
So these foundations really are helping in research and development and even production.
These foundations are doing a great job, in fact. In fact, these foundations now, they have funded a program for Nigeria. It's called the Ag Results Program, by which they're incentivizing the use of Aflasafe by Nigerian farmers. So last year, 5,000 farmers were incentivized to use Aflasafe. And these farmers earn in between 13 and 17% premium on their maize in the open market.
That's amazing.
It's actually, it's happening. The main thing is that once you have an innovation, somebody has to drive it. And oftentimes what happens is the scientists, they will have an innovation and they will think that driving it commercially is not their responsibility. Or it's a responsibility either of the government or of a private agency, but oftentimes they don't come forward immediately. So it's our responsibility as scientists that what we developed over a 15-year period, if we let it grow, stay in our lab, I'm committing a crime by not actually letting this technology go to people who actually need it. And so my passion and our institute's passion, IIT's passion now, is to see how we can make this available to people who need it, who may not know it's available, make them aware that it's available, and have the product so that they can make their food safe, they can earn more money in the market, and they can have healthy children and healthy mothers.
So I can say kudos to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Absolutely.
So have you taken the message of the dangers of aflatoxin to the interior, places like Ishane, your state?
We did. We have not, I shouldn't say that we have done enough. There's a lot more scope to do it. But we have started doing that. We have started doing that about 3 years ago. And we don't do it by ourselves. We partner with the national institutions. In this case, one of the major national institutions with whom we have partnered is NAFDAC. NAFDAC is a big supporter because NAFDAC knows what aflatoxin does, and NAFDAC regulates aflatoxin. They have been actually doing TV programs on aflatoxin. Similarly, there is an agency, National Agriculture Research Agency, based in Kaduna. So they have done radio programs, that they have done jingles with their radio stations. But as I mentioned, this is not enough. This has to be a regular feature.
We are talking about a toxin that affects the health of the people. Don't you think government can come in?
Government actually is coming in. Well, The issue about aflatoxin is this, that you can talk about it in public, but you don't want to create a scare. Because if you talk about it, you need to provide people with an alternative. Because that question that is going to come up is, okay, I have it, what do I do with it? And if you can't provide an alternative on what to do with it, then you create a scare and a panic.
We already have Aflatoxin.
Right now, we have that. Earlier, we didn't have it. So now, the Ministry of Agriculture is one of our biggest supporters. The previous Minister of Agriculture, he actually had a policy statement on aflatoxin control, and AflaSafe was part of that. Okay, and there was a talk going on before he left that AflaSafe will become part of the growth enhancement GES scheme of the Ministry of Agriculture, the federal ministry. But that is still on the card. So in other words, the government actually has provided support, and they are behind us. They serve on the steering committee of our project, actually.
The program is Economic SearchLight on Splash 105.5 FM, the Integrity Station. I am discussing with a senior plant pathologist, Dr. Ranajit Bandyopadhyay. He is of the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. Don't go away, we will be back. Welcome back. The program is Economic SearchLight on the Integrity Station. My guest is Dr. Ranajit Bandyopadhyay, a senior plant pathologist at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. Is Aflasafe a product of RITA, or it has to do with the United States Department of Agriculture, where Dr. Peter Cottee comes in?
So the technology, the principles of technology that goes into Aflasafe, the patent was held by Peter. And Dr. Peter Cottee is one of our strongest collaborators. So the work that we are doing in Africa is done in collaboration with Dr. Peter Cottee. So the initial technology was developed in the United States. And in the United States, there are two products which are used by farmers to a very large extent. What we have done is to actually adapt that technology for use in Africa. And we have done that adaptation. Right now, we are doing it in 11 countries. Nigeria was the first one in the whole process. And so we are most advanced in Nigeria. But similar technology as Aflasafe is actually already registered for use in Kenya. That we had developed along with the Kenyan government and with the USDA ARS. And we have now products that are ready for use in Senegal, Gambia, Burkina Faso, and there are products that are about to be ready in Zambia, and there are more products under testing in Ghana, in Tanzania, Mozambique, and Malawi. And there are newer products coming up in Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi. Aflatoxin is actually regulated in the market, and is regulated since it's a toxin. Countries in Europe, they have very strict regulation. If you can't meet that standard, you cannot export your crop to European Union. For example, there was something called groundnut pyramid in Kano long time ago, in 70s. You don't see groundnut pyramids anymore. Senegal was one of the largest exporters of groundnut. Nigeria was the largest exporter of groundnut. Nigeria exports tiny amount of groundnut now. And one of the reasons for that is the Nigerian groundnut has aflatoxin, and the European Union has a standard of 4 parts per billion, which is very small. And the Nigerian groundnut most often cannot meet that standard. So we have had instances where farmers have they have sent the product to Europe, and in the European ports they had tested it. They found high amount of toxin, and then they told the trader, you have two options. One option is to pay for a return shipment. The second option is pay for burning it. And so it has got a really serious trade implication as well.
So the African economy is facing a hard time, perhaps because of this.
African economy is facing a hard time because of three things actually. One is because of aflatoxin. It's got impact on health of people, it has got impact on trade opportunities, and it has got impact on food security. So there are three effects of aflatoxin that has a deep-rooted effect that many people don't know about.
Can't we get resistant plants?
There has been efforts to develop resistance to aflatoxin, and it's been going on for about 40-50 years. And in the United States, they have spent millions and millions of dollars to develop resistance to aflatoxin. They have found aflatoxin resistance, but those varieties are very low yielders. They cannot be used by farmers. So there is no resistance in a variety that farmers can use, in spite of spending 40-50 years of research and spending millions and millions of dollars on that. But still, search is going on using newer technologies. But right now, we don't see a variety that is resistant to aflatoxin coming into the market for at least a couple of more years.
What would you advise as a storage solution?
There are some new drying methods on the horizon. There are things called solar dryers. There are things called cabinet dryers, shallow bed dryers. Oftentimes, some of them are actually expensive to use. Many of them are large, like the cabinet dryers can be large, the one that I have seen. There's a new solar bubble dryer that is coming up with one of the companies producing it. So there are different kinds of technologies coming in. So drying, rapid drying, not just drying, rapid drying is very important. That's something that farmers can do. Second is simple things like don't dry your grains on the ground because the fungus is there on the ground. Even on the coal tar? In fact, even in the coal tar, even in the air right now, this fungus is present almost everywhere.
That means we are in for bigger trouble because the rural farmer dries on the road.
Right. So that's something that should not be done. They should actually dry it on a tarp or a tarpaulin or plastic just to keep it away. Not only for keeping it away, but also that will allow them to cover the grains when the rains come. Right now, when the rains come, I've seen this on the roadside, dark cloud on the horizon, grains drying, and the farmers, the poor women actually, they are picking up those grains just to avoid it getting wet. So good drying is really important. Putting it on tarp away from soil, dry it on a tarp, not on the soil. Third thing, store your grains properly. When I say store your grains properly, ensure that you don't get insect damage. Insect damage increases the amount of toxin, okay? Fungal growth and toxin. Second, store it in such a way that you don't allow moisture to get in. Okay? There are new kinds of bags coming into the market. There is something called PIX bags. There's Grain Pro bags. Basically what it does is you put the grain in the bag and then tie it in such a way that no air gets in. And so the insects actually die. And it's a very effective technology actually. And these bags are gradually coming into the market now.
How can a farmer know that his or her grains are affected by aflatoxins?
The only way if it is really badly affected, you can see it because you can see the fungus.
Is the fungus whitish?
It's actually a greenish in color. But not having the green color doesn't mean that the toxin is not there. Most often, you can't see the green color, but the fungus is inside, and the toxin is inside. And so the only way you can actually make out whether it has got toxin or not is to do a chemical analysis. And so there are these cheap, I shouldn't say cheap now, it's cheap in the US, but by the time it comes here, it becomes expensive. So there are these tests available, like pregnancy test kits, for example, same format. You can find out whether your grain contains toxin at a high level or not by using those tests. So one can do it, but sometimes the cost of treating a field with Aflasafe is less than the cost of using a test. Okay, so this is what we say to the farmers, that AflaSafe actually gives you insurance from aflatoxin contamination.
Do you still distribute free of charge?
We don't distribute. Earlier, when we were doing the trials, we were distributing free of charge. But right now, the farmers are buying it. But the key thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that we are not a commercial organization. We are a research organization. So we don't do marketing. And so many people actually don't know that such a product actually exists. And so maybe through your program, people would come to know that there is a solution for aflatoxin in Nigeria that can reduce toxin contamination to a very large extent, make maize and groundnut safe from aflatoxin, that can be used by the food and feed industries for making their industries safe for and more productive.
Dr. Ranajit, just tell me, do you think I have aflatoxin inside me now?
I can't. You look pretty healthy, huh? I can't actually say that whether you have aflatoxin or not, but what I can tell you this, based on studies that have been done in West Africa, that in Togo, Benin, and Ghana, when the study was done in the rural areas, 98% of the children had aflatoxin in their blood.
98%?
98%.
And they can die from it?
If the exposure level is high, they can die. But most often is this stunting. This chronic exposure leads to stunting. If the toxin contamination is very high, then of course people can die of acute poisoning. And so by looking at you, I can't tell you whether you have aflatoxin or not. We have to do a chemical test for it. But the point is that the exposure in this part of the world is quite high.
Is it high time a country like Nigeria invested enough money in research and development?
Absolutely. Innovation drives a country. If we stay in ancient times, we will live like in ancient times. We will not progress. So innovations provides the avenues for making progress. Innovation develops technologies. And good technologies can actually improve lives of people. And so to me, it's absolutely essential for a country to invest in innovation that can develop technologies and products and practices and services that can improve the lives of people. There is no two opinion about that.
I'm not too comfortable with foreign inventions being introduced to solve African problems. If there was no Peter Corti, no United States Department of Agriculture, what would have happened to us with regard to aflatoxin?
That technology having used there, that was actually instrumental for us to begin to work on this. So Peter is absolutely, he has done really great pieces of work out there, and with him we have actually developed the technology. Having said that, we have taken the principles of the technology, but this technology is now homegrown. This is a Nigerian technology now. This is a Ghanaian technology. This is a Senegalese technology, because the products are now being developed in these countries using indigenous resources.
Dr. Ranajit Bandyopadhyay, thank you for speaking with Splash FM.
It's a pleasure, and it was great talking to you.
Dr. Ranajit is a senior plant pathologist at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. Do you have any comment? The email address is eobilo@splashfm1055.com. eobilo@splashfm1055.com. You can leave a message for me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @eobilo. For text message, the number is 080-999-18449. 080-999-18449. The sound engineer for this production is Blessed Akum. I am Edmund Obilo. Next week Friday is another time. Until then, keep listening to Splash FM.